Shalom. Welcome to Understanding the World with Rabbi David Kaufman. It's a wonderful thing to be back on the air. I've had a lot of people asking me over the past couple of years, what happened to the show? I used to do a show called The Whole Megillah, which was primarily about just Jewish topics, some foreign policy. We're expanding a little bit because I've been doing a little bit of different kinds of advocacy over the last couple of years, and now it's an opportunity for me to do a little bit more than just Middle East uh, and just Jewish topics. But today, of course, that's exactly what we're going to do because I want to give everyone an update on what's been happening over the last couple of years. And if I told you that if you watched my last show and then just tuned in today, you probably wouldn't have missed a whole lot. I could summarize it in same old thing, different day to a certain extent. When people talk about the status quo not being able to be maintained, if you simply looked a couple of years ago and what's happening today, you might say, well, wait a minute. It is exactly the same as it has been. People who want peace to happen tomorrow are still pushing for peace to happen tomorrow. People who are opposing peace are still working to oppose peace. The big difference is 2 years ago, people thought there was more of a process, and today people are a little more doubtful that there is a functional process that can be put in place. The first segment of the show today will deal with that, really. Where are we today as far as realistic hopes for peace? And I start there simply because I think this is where the audience that has worked with me over the years, the people that I have spoken to, that's where their interests are going to lie today. And as I move forward with the show, there are going to be a lot of different topics that will come up. Not only will we talk about Israel-Palestinian issues, but we will also talk about issues related to the broader Middle East, what's going on in Egypt, for example, what's going on in Turkey, Syria, certainly Iran, and then the advocacy that I've been doing more recently also comes to have an impact, which is dealing with Sudan. And some people say, well, Sudan is Africa. It has nothing to do with the Israel-Palestinian conflict. It's really not the same. Well, what you find out is right now, Iran, Sudan, Egypt, Hamas, Hezbollah, and potentially even Syria are all working together and to a certain extent, and it's a different world, and we need to deal with it. And most of the media doesn't understand that there are connections there, but we'll get to that in future shows as we go on. I also have dealt with hunger issues over the years. I've dealt with a lot of social issues over the years, and certainly when we get to Jewish holidays, there may be some things that I'll talk about related to Jewish holidays as well, either over whole shows or segments. You will notice in coming shows that there will be guests who will be joining me either in the studio here or on Skype, coming in from all over the world in shows coming ahead, whether they will be talking about the Israel-Palestinian conflict, peace issues, issues related to Sudan or others. I have been in contact with leaders of Sudanese communities around the world, including some of the leaders of the Sudan Revolutionary Forces in Sudan itself, who may be joining us via Skype potentially over the coming months ahead. So there are lots of different opportunities that we'll have on this show to interact with different leaders on different topics. First thing I wanted to get into is kind of where the peace process is, and I'm I'm the leader of an organization, well, co-leader of an organization really, called weareforisrael.org. And you can find the website, weareforisrael.org, online. We are a centrist organization. We have over 350 rabbis signed on in support of our mission statement, most of whom are Reform and conservative rabbis. We tend to be the more moderate, toward the political center kind of rabbinic organization, with a number of supporters who are not rabbis. And so if you're not a rabbi and you're interested in supporting what I'm talking about and what We Are for Israel stands for on the website, I would urge you to go to the website, and you can sign on to the mission statement, or you can simply sign on to receive our emails and keep up to date on what's going on. There's an article that I wrote in December. I wrote on December 11th. It's called Realistic Hopes for Peace in the Real World. And it was in response to a number of articles that I had seen online dealing with people who were peace advocates who had lost hope in the peace process. And I wanted to share a little bit of that with you and kind of talk about that as part of the first segment today, because it sets up the second segment of the show today, which also deals with kind of current attempts to restart the peace process, or restart a peace process, or even recreate a peace process, depending on where you believe things stand. So I've heard many powerful speakers over the years talk about Israel. Few among them compare with Leon Wieseltier, whose absurdly elevated language and flowing, shockingly white hair would make him stand out in any crowd of speakers. Wieseltier is someone who most often makes sense to me amid a plethora of voices who are all too unrealistic. He regularly sees things that should be obvious but are not. And he wrote in the New Republic in December an article called Losing Hope, in which he talked about the fact that he's lost hope in the possibility of peace between Israelis and Palestinians. And not solely because of beliefs in the Israeli governmental positions and the Israeli governmental situation, which, you know, the people in the peace advocate community sometimes want to blame everything on the Israeli government's positions. Wieseltier would also say, you know, it's going to be difficult to move the Israeli government in certain directions, but certainly it's difficult to move the Palestinian leaders in certain directions too. So when Wieseltier wrote about losing hope, people listened to him. His words were shared in forum after forum, that he lost hope that peace is possible in his lifetime. I've communicated over the past few months with people like Arthur Waskow of the Shalom Center, who would like to see hopes for peace around every corner, constantly believes that peace is possible, that human beings can overcome the challenges they face that make it difficult for them to pursue peace. An absolutely wonderful person. I will potentially have Arthur Waskow on this show at some point in the future. I don't necessarily agree with Arthur. In fact, I often disagree with Arthur about the way that he sees the world. But I do have the same hope for Arthur that peace is possible for Israelis and Palestinians. And so we will talk about that as the show goes forward. Arthur Waskow wrote in an article soon after Operation Pillar of Defense began, in which he cited Gershon Baskin, who's another person who we'll have on this show. Gershon Baskin is the director of the Israel-Palestine Center for Research and Information, I believe, IPCRI. His opinion that Hamas was interested in negotiated peace. And you will see all kinds of different positions out there that say Hamas is interested in a negotiated peace. Khaled Mashal, however, seems to indicate that that's not the case. And Khaled Mashal is the leader of Hamas, and he said upon setting foot in Gaza in December that Palestine is ours from the river to the sea, and from the south to the north. There will be no concession on an inch of the land. We will never recognize the legitimacy of the Israeli occupation, and therefore there is no legitimacy for Israel, no matter how long it will take. And Gershon Baskin responded to that, saying, Hamas says never recognize Israel, never make peace with Israel. Fine. Palestine is a recognized state. Gaza is a liberated part of Palestine. Important. Gaza is a liberated part of Palestine. Gaza is no longer occupied territory. Okay, there's a lot of argument against that. People would want to say that Gaza is occupied territory. Gaza is not occupied territory. Gaza is liberated territory. The Rafah border with Egypt is open. No occupation anymore. Israel should announce that Gaza has 2 years from today to take care of its own electricity, water, food, and economic needs. In 2 years from today, the Israeli-Gaza border is closed, and nothing will come to Gaza from Israel. Let them trade through Egypt. Use El Arish, Port Said, whatever, not through Israel, which they desire to destroy. If they want to build a seaport, go ahead. If they smuggle arms through that port, Israel will stop it. If they want quiet, they have to give quiet. They want war, as Khaled Mashal said, they'll get war. 2 years, that's what I would say, then they're on their own. That's Gershon Baskin. Now, Gershon Baskin is a very strong peace advocate. You got to understand that. So one certainly has to add to this the fact that the Palestinians sought and received observer state status in the United Nations. And I wrote an article about that for We Are For Israel as well, talking about the impact of observer state status. The Israelis' decision to move forward with construction planning or planning for construction in the E1 corridor, which is the corridor east of Jerusalem, basically connecting Jerusalem and Ma'ale Adumim, also caused issues. And we'll talk about some of those issues related to E1 as we move forward in future shows too. There's way too much information for me to just present it all today and hope to have it explained clearly. I'm not going to try to do that. I'm certainly not going to try to do that in the first 15 minutes of the show. So as far as peace goes, as crazy as it all may sound, I don't think all is lost. There are several, what I would say are seemingly intractable arguments that I think have been solved, intractable issues. First, there's always been a concern about how to allow for a physical connection between Gaza and the West Bank. There are concerns about Hamas coming to power in the West Bank should they obtain increased access to the West Bank. And these have made it difficult for the Palestinians to consider national elections. Fully separating Gaza from the West Bank can actually enable everyone to move forward, finding a solution. It makes sense for Israel to do what Gershon Baskin suggests for Gaza, and potentially for the Palestinian Authority to simply let Gaza go. Is there any realistic hope that Gaza will cease to be home to an Iranian-backed Hamas and Islamic Jihad anytime soon? The answer is no. Separating Gaza's leaders from the West Bank allows for Israel to be at war with the people of Gaza and at peace with the people of the West Bank. That's simple. Why must we insist on allowing those filled with hatred in Gaza to torpedo prospects for a better future for Israel and for the people in the West Bank? Of course, the Palestinian Authority itself would need to stop claiming Gaza and its radicals for this to happen. That hasn't occurred yet, but it could. Meanwhile, observer state status allows for all sorts of solutions that full state status would not. And most of those potential solutions that observer state status would allow are better for the lives of Palestinians than are the full state alternatives. We'll talk about that more in our next segment. While some would argue that Israel maintaining security over the Jordanian border, would turn the West Bank into a giant prison, one could make the argument that it would turn the combination of Israel and the West Bank into secure places for cooperation and prosperity to take place, providing a healthy and happy future for peoples of both areas for decades to come, and potentially opening doors as nothing but long-term peaceful coexistence could do to the prospects of a fully independent Palestinian state living alongside a safe and secure Israel. And we'll talk about the impact of observer state status on that specifically. And then we're going to go and talk about the people who are trying to restart the peace process today as we move forward into our next segment.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
I'm Brian Leach, owner and general manager of Service Legends. I brought along a couple of the home comfort heroes.
Hi, I'm Tammy Wells.
I am Nick Wondershad.
I'm administrative manager.
I am the senior technician
from Service Legends.
It seems like every good thing, when you feel it to the bone that it's good, there's a lot of hard work put behind it. I don't think that you can fake it and have it turn out good.
You know, if we seemed like, okay, that's just weird, it's just a furnace, why would you believe so deeply in a furnace? It's not just that, you know, we want to show the world that you can have good service.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be, it's your home.
You know, it's built into our daily trainings, it's built into our culture, that we're going to do whatever it takes to have each client say they love us, period.
That's why we spend all the hours in the training that we do. And if we guarantee it's going to be a good experience for you, or else it's free, what type of work do you think we're going to do?
There is a guarantee.
Temperature selection guarantee, fixed right or it's free guarantee, comfort guarantee, best value guarantee. All of these guarantees hold us accountable to ensuring that we exceed your expectations. And if for whatever reason we'd fail and we can't make it right, we guarantee all of those guarantees with a 100% money back guarantee.
I mean, if you don't think that your technician can fix it right, are you going to say that to a client? No.
You don't have to worry about having a technician come to your house.
We drug test, background check all of our team members. We put safe people in your home. Each and every one of our service techs, 400 hours a year in training.
You tell it the minute they walk in the door. They know what they're doing, they've done their homework, and they actually truly care about what you want.
Because at the end of the day, you're the person that makes sure I have a job.
They're going to be listening. They're going to want to know what your challenges are. Then they're going to come and give you options, and you get to choose.
If I'm there to help and I make it easy and painless, I did my job right that day.
Well, when it comes to your comfort, safety, and your family, you know, you don't necessarily go buy the most expensive, but you get the most bang for your buck.
Oh, it's worth it, because there's a lot of people that will find a way to get it to work right now and then leave and then come back, charge you again, and the cycle just repeats itself. So when I'm out there looking at the furnace, I want to find why it failed today. How can we change the part today with something that you're not going to have to worry about? Is it worth changing the part today? I mean, you can put a lot of money into a furnace. I can fix parts all day. There's good job security in that for me, but is it the right thing for you?
I get a lot of the phone calls of after the technicians are there. They're just in awe. They're like, wow, you guys are great. I mean, I don't even know what to say. You guys are great. Everything you did was perfect. It was great.
Keep going though, I like this.
Just give us a try. I'm gonna take all the risk.
I've got the time to make this right. I've got the support to make it right.
Just check us out.
And if you don't see the value in what we do,
I mean, fixed right or it's free or 100% money back.
enough said.
Shalom. Welcome back to Understanding the World with Rabbi David Kaufman. Before we continue with our segment of talking about observer state status, I wanted to offer my thanks to Dr. Ronald Bergman and to Bergman Falkers Cosmetic Surgery for their sponsorship of my show. I really appreciate it. Ron is a good friend of mine, and I appreciate all the support I can get for airing these views and for bringing the guests that will be on this show onto the air so that people can interact with them here in Des Moines and all around the world as we go forward with this show. Many of you don't know me, and I wanted to do a brief kind of background of who I am. I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri. I am a Reformed Jewish rabbi, which tends to mean I'm more on the social progressive side of things. I tend to be a little bit more conservative than a lot of my colleagues, or at least on the more conservative side of the reform movement as far as foreign policy goes. Although certainly compared to a lot of people out there, I'm nowhere close to on the right, but that's why I consider myself a moderate or centrist, and a number of my rabbinic colleagues see us, We Are for Israel, and my opinions in that political center space. Work with Republicans and Democrats on many issues, and I think that that's the way things need to work. It's important to get support as you move forward from people of all perspectives. And not only do I work with people on the right and left of center, but oftentimes I work with people on the very far left of center or very far right, depending on what the issue is. And I find that there may be people who I agree with on one issue or two issues who I disagree with on many other issues. That simply is the way that politics work today. If you expect to be in agreement with everybody on everything, you're going to be disappointed most of the time, and you're going to find very few people who you can work with. So you will see on this show that I will have people who are part of Christians United for Israel on the evangelical right, and I will have people who are part of the peace movement on the left, spanning a very broad variety of political views dealing with Israel. And then on other issues, for sure, there will be people who will be on different sides of the political spectrum. This show is designed to let you have the ability to understand the different perspectives that are out there. And the only way to do that is to have you hear those views and be able to share those views. So once again, I wanted to thank Bergman Falkers for giving me the opportunity to do that on this show. I am the rabbi of Temple B'nai Jeshurun, which is a Reformed Jewish congregation in Des Moines, and I certainly thank my congregation and its members for allowing me this opportunity to do that as well. I think this congregation is a wonderful congregation. The community is a wonderful community, and they're very interested in understanding what's going on in the world and helping to perform acts of tikkun olam, making the world a better place by changing the world, repairing what's wrong in the world. And in order to do that properly, again, you need to understand what's going on in the world. You need to understand the different positions, and you need to try to talk to people who are not in your choir. You can't just preach to the choir. You have to talk to people who are not in the choir if you want to change the world. And that's one of the goals of Reform Judaism, and I'm grateful for the support of my congregation in helping me to do that. So returning to where we were, observer state status. It's very interesting that Palestinian Authority was pretty much pushed into seeking observer state status by people who said, this is the hammer you can use against Israel. Israel, it really doesn't want you to get observer state status. You should go after observer state status. It'll give you more rights in the United Nations. You'll be able to potentially take Israel to the International Criminal Court and any number of other things. Okay. The Palestinians could have done that a long time ago. They could have gotten observer state status at any point in time, really. Most of the world, most of the nations in the world, and all you needed was a majority, all they needed was a majority of the General Assembly at the United Nations, would have supported the Palestinians in the pursuit of observer state status at the United Nations. There are two things that kept them from doing that. One was it's actually a violation of the Oslo Accords. The Oslo Accords say that doing that negotiations are the only way that the Palestinians and Israelis were to be able to settle their differences, and that seeking other avenues outside of negotiations was a violation of the agreement. So there are people who actually say that by the fact that the Palestinians went to the United Nations to get observer state status, they have violated the fundamental premise of the Oslo Accord. Let's set that aside for a minute, because the bigger issue, the bigger reason they didn't, is because the Palestinian Authority, and Yasser Arafat in particular, would have seen observer state status as potentially a final status. In other words, rather than at some point being able to obtain full state status in the United Nations, they potentially could have just stopped with observer state status. And the reality is observer state status may prove more beneficial than a full state status would. And let me explain that here, because that I think is where I see hope in the peace process and where a lot of people are finding difficulty, because a lot of people right now are trying to figure out how the Palestinians are going to be able to get full state status in the current situation, when in reality they may already have most of what they really need to have and would be of most benefit to them. Now, let me explain here. So, full state status, this is fully sovereign, controlling borders, the whole works, could potentially result in a similar relationship between Israel and the West Bank as Israel has with Gaza. Israel could completely shut its border with the West Bank, essentially forcing Palestinians to use the Jordanian border and severing Palestinian state from economic cooperation with Israel. If they're fully sovereign, that's a possibility. It could, should attacks come from the West Bank, go to war with its residents as it has in Gaza. Jordanian border control solely in the hands of Palestinians would necessitate significantly increased border controls between Israel and a Palestinian state if that border remained open. In other words, we're talking about checkpoints now. We're talking about difficulty getting across the border from the Palestinian territories in the West Bank into Israel now. That would pale in comparison to what you would have if the Palestinian state was completely independent and controlled its own borders, because Israel would have to be sure that fighters, potential fighters and terrorists coming from other countries through Jordan into the West Bank were stopped before they came into Israel. So in other words, full state status may well sever Israeli-Palestinian connections, economic, social, cultural, and religious, or make those connections much more difficult to maintain. Observer state status, on the other hand, now granted, it could potentially change a little bit, potentially resolves many, if not all, of these issues. Interaction between a West Bank as an observer state and Israel could provide numerous advantages to both Israelis and Palestinians, including economic cooperation, tourism, defense cooperation, and a whole host of other things that could be severely limited should the West Bank be fully independent. Palestinian residents of the West Bank could be allowed to go in and out of the country through the Jordanian border while passing through Israeli security upon entry. As internal security increases and this arrangement becomes the norm, security between Israel and the West Bank could diminish significantly. Most outposts and settlements, which are a difficulty in trying to create a homogeneous Palestinian state on most of the territory, could be removed from the territory and allotted to the Palestinians, and governance of the residents of that territory could be conducted primarily, if not exclusively, by the Palestinians themselves as an observer state. Now, I'm not talking about the settlement blocks. I'm not talking about Jerusalem here. But let's talk for a second about those two. Okay, the settlement blocks, quote-unquote settlement blocks, which you're going to hear more about in the news in the weeks ahead as the Israeli coalition is formed and people are pushing for peace negotiations. Those settlement blocks are mostly along the border between the West Bank and Israel. Okay, they're along the 1967 armistice lines, I should say, because it's not really a border. Our 1949 armistice line. Get my terms correct here. 1949 armistice line. Armistice line is simply where the fighting stopped and who controlled what territory at that time. Israel's recognized as a nation, but those borders aren't necessarily recognized. Okay, so there are all kinds of legal issues that go on there, and I don't want to deal with that. So we're going to talk about armistice lines right now. The issue is most of those settlement blocks are along that border. Much of the population, the Israeli population that is in those areas, the areas that the population has moved into since 1967, are in the area of Jerusalem. They're not in the areas that are further into the middle of the West Bank. Most of them are near Jerusalem. When the Palestinians and others talk about East Jerusalem, they're really not talking about East Jerusalem. They're talking about everything but straight West Jerusalem. If you look at a map of Jerusalem from 1967, you will see that the Jews controlled straight west, not including the Old City, which is where the Temple Mount is and the holiest site in the Jewish tradition. Home of the Western Wall. The Western Wall is the western wall of the Temple Mount. The Jews controlled just straight west. Jordan controlled northwest, north, northeast, east, southeast, south, and southwest. And that they call East Jerusalem. Okay, East Jerusalem is simply northeast or south of the 1967 border. And part of the reason it's portrayed as East Jerusalem is because east-west split sounds fair. Okay, now, if you're actually in Jerusalem, you will see that none of these splits make really much of any sense. And when we're dealing with the situation of the division of a potential division of Jerusalem, there are so many issues that come into play about how it could even possibly work and what it would be like touring such a place, that you'll see it's very difficult to conceptualize. We'll talk more about that afterwards, and I want to talk a little bit about this idea of people who want to see opportunities for peace right now and want to pressure the United States government to try to make peace right now after the break. Thank you for joining me.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
Drink, dance, party. Kitty's is the ultimate dance club in Des Moines. A huge dance floor with room to move, 3 bars to keep your drinks full, and kickin' DJs playing all your favorite dance music. At Kitty's, we've always got your birthday party planned with Birthday Fridays. That's right, when your birthday rolls around, there's only one place to go. Gather up your friends and head to Kitty's, where you drink free on the Friday of your birthday week. Find out more about Birthday Fridays at kittysusa.com. Kitty's, all kinds of people, all kinds of music, all kinds of fun.
Drug and alcohol addiction slowly steals a person's identity, tearing away pieces of their life little by little until one day it seems like the hope of a happy future is gone and there's no chance of getting it back. Here at St. Gregory Retreat Centers, we can assure you that there is hope. Our unique approach to recovery begins with the understanding that the dysfunction and damage caused by addiction can be overcome, not just dealt with. Don't let another day go by. Call St. Gregory today.
Whether you're 10, 25, 50, 80 years old and beyond, everyone needs to live within their means. I'm Tom Coates with Consumer Credit of America. For almost a quarter of a century, we've helped people of all ages learn to manage their personal finances to benefit them far into the future. When problems arise, we've got the experience you need to make those debt problems go away. Got financial problems? Call Consumer Credit of America.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
Shalom. Welcome back to Understanding the World with Rabbi David Kaufman, one of the shows of the 12talkto.com network. I was talking to Ryan, my producer here, over the break, and I said, Ryan, I've been doing this for quite a while, and I have shows from 2009 that some people still refer back to, interviews with different people that I did as part of the last time I had a show, my whole Megillah show on this very network. And there's so many different websites and different places that things have gone over the many years that I'm trying to consolidate it all in onetotalkto.com. And hoping to use that and Want to Talk To Net on YouTube as a place to put various videos and things that I'll refer to on this show, as well as recordings of this show, and allow you the ability to see as we develop issues, the shows about issues that come up. The current issue, the most current, is a push, the most current in the peace process, I should say, because obviously there are other issues in different nations, and we'll talk about other countries as we move forward in future shows. Just dealing with the peace process as such today. The National Interreligious Leadership Initiative for Peace in the Middle East is a group of religious leaders from mainline Christian churches, includes the Catholic Church, and also some rabbis who are on the left of the political spectrum and want the United States to play an active role in promoting the development of a peace process. Now, I say promoting the development of a peace process. Others might say promoting the restarting of the peace process. Some might say advancing the peace process. I say development simply because I don't think there is a peace process right now. It's certainly not a peace process in the way that we've had a peace process before, with scheduled meetings and deadlines and people understanding what the deadlines are and all of that. We're not there anymore. We're at a position today in February of 2013 where the next step is uncertain. We know what the status quo is, although there are disagreements as to whether or not the status quo can be maintained, which is a whole other issue. We don't know what the next step is. Okay, so what you find is that there are groups like NILI, the National Interreligious Leadership Initiative, who want to get the United States to put pressure on the sides to re-engage the possibility of peace. And that's really what we're talking about, is re-engaging the possibility of peace. NILI recently produced a document entitled Jewish, Christian, and Muslim Religious Leaders Call for Bold New Initiative for Israeli-Palestinian Peace Before It Is Too Late. Because they worry that at some point it's not going to be possible to create a two-state solution. Now, as you heard earlier in this show, a two-state solution, two states, meaning Israel and a Palestinian state, may not even be the best solution at this point. If it's possible, it would be great. But we may be looking at a three-state solution. We may be looking at a separate Gaza and then a solution that deals with the West Bank. That's a possibility. Okay, so what I want to do is not just talk about two-state solution as the only possibility of peace. I want to talk about potential possibilities for peace, whatever they may be. And I want to make sure that we're talking about solutions that are going to be good for the Palestinian people as well as the Israelis. Now, if you said, but Rabbi, a two-state solution is the best way to go, I could argue that the people in the West Bank want one thing that would look like, and the people in Gaza want another thing that Palestinian state would look like. And you may not be able to please both of them under any circumstances. And potentially, if you try to please the people in Gaza as to what that would look like, it might not make peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians in the West Bank even possible. So it's important to understand that solutions for peace should not be limited to let's talk about two states and hope that everybody understands what we're talking about. Let's just talk about peace solutions, because we want peace. And it may be more advantageous and work to talk about solutions that involve the West Bank in one way and Gaza in another. So this group, Neely, wants to have the United States play an active role in bringing the sides. And what Neely calls for is immediate sustained leadership from the United States. And what does immediate sustained leadership mean? Well, when you bring in the words bold initiatives for peace, unique leverage, and active, fair, and firm U.S. leadership later in the document, these words would seem to imply pressure being brought to bear. Now, those of us who are Israel advocates understand that pressure is often brought to bear, and it's generally brought to bear on one side, Israel. And when you talk about leverage, leverage is very much an alarm bell ringing term for Israel advocates, because generally the word leverage means have the United States threaten Israel in some way, threaten to withhold some sort of support for Israel in order to pressure Israel to make some sort of concession. That's generally what the word leverage means. So what kind of pressure could the United States bring to bear on the Palestinian Authority, for example, much less on Hamas? It couldn't simply withhold funds. In fact, the United States has thought about doing it. Congress has thought about doing that multiple times. It simply can't be done without jeopardizing the existence of the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority could collapse, could entirely collapse without funding from the United States and from other sources to help it pay its expenses. Could the United States threaten Hamas, for example, by promising Israel weaponry that could help it defend Israeli citizens against Hamas attacks? Well, the United States is going to help Israel defend itself against Hamas attacks anyway, and to not offer that defense might be considered a pretty horrible thing to do. It might be considered not only an anti-Israel thing to do, but an anti-Jewish thing to do and an anti-human thing to do. So we talk about denying things like Iron Dome, funding for Iron Dome to help Israel defend itself against and its citizens against attacks from Hamas. Of course, we're not going to talk about that. The United States is going to give Israel that stuff as long as the United States has any care about Israel at all. Would the United States threaten to veto anti-Israel resolutions in the United Nations? The United States already vetoes anti-Israel resolutions in the United Nations. And to not do so would harm Israel and bring a friendship into question. So there's a question of whether or not the United States has any leverage whatsoever on the Palestinian side. And I think the answer to that is no. It has very little. There may be some, but it's extreme pressure. It's only pressure that you would use in extreme circumstances. You know, if the Palestinian Authority decided to launch an all-out war, then yes, you could bring in some of these circumstances. But you can't use that leverage to get them to come to the negotiating table because they know you're not going to utilize it. And if you do utilize it, there won't be any negotiation because there won't be any Palestinian Authority left. So those aren't issues. The only way the United States can bring leverage is against the United States. Well, actually, there is one way that the United States could bring leverage against the Palestinian side, but it would eliminate the peace process. The United States could basically threaten as follows. We will recognize Israeli control over these territories and maintain the status quo indefinitely until you come to the peace table. The United States could threaten that, but that undermines the argument being made by the peace side that that's not possible. So either it's possible and the United States could threaten to maintain it, or it's not possible and therefore it's not a threat. On the other hand, the United States could threaten weakened support for its friend and ally Israel in numerous ways, not limited to military aid and support, intelligence gathering, diplomatic, financial support. So the United States could threaten Israel in a number of ways. Probably won't. I can't imagine that it would in a number of those ways, but it could. And to a certain extent, that seems to be what is being asked for people who are advocating for peace. So there are statements about fairness, which seem to be merely a fiction that's created to make pressuring Israel look like it's in the context of pressuring both sides, when in fact it's really just pressuring Israel. Now, first question is whether or not such pressure should ever be applied to a friend and an ally. But if you're going to apply it, why would you apply it now? There's absolutely no chance for progress to happen in a number of issues because of this. It's a time when nations bordering Israel are in utter chaos. It's a time when all of the Arab governments in the region are under threat by radicals and no few are falling to them. One of the big concerns that Israel would have in any creation of a Palestinian state is what happens if that state falls to radicals. So, right now, Gaza is in control of a Muslim Brotherhood allied, Iranian-backed and armed force desirous of destroying Israel. Palestinian Authority has no power and little influence over the affairs of Gaza, and its control over the West Bank is largely dependent on the West Bank and Israel. This is a time to encourage Israel to make concessions, a time when the Palestinian side has little ability to make concessions that it must make if any agreement is to be reached. Let's talk about real possibilities of peace. We'll talk about it after a short break.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
Whether you're 10, 25, 50, 80 years old and beyond, everyone needs to live within their means. I'm Tom Coates with Consumer Credit of America. For almost a quarter of a century, we've helped people of all ages learn to manage their personal finances to benefit them far into the future. When problems arise, we've got the experience you need to make those debt problems go away. Got financial problems? Call Consumer Credit of America.
Drink, Dance, party. Kitty's is the ultimate dance club in Des Moines. A huge dance floor with room to move, 3 bars to keep your drinks full, and kickin' DJs playing all your favorite dance music. At Kitty's, we've always got your birthday party planned with Birthday Fridays. That's right, when your birthday rolls around, there's only one place to go. Gather up your friends and head to Kitty's, where you drink free on the Friday of your birthday week. Find out more about Birthday Fridays at kittysusa.com. Kitty's, all kinds of people, all kinds of music, all kinds of fun.
If Tom Coates from Consumer Credit of America was your personal webmaster, Tom would filter out all bad debt emails. If Tom was your mailman, you'd never get any debt reduction junk mail. If Tom Coates was a lineman, he'd block any phone calls offering to reduce your credit card debt.
Hi, I'm Tom Coates with Consumer Credit of America, and we're still your best choice for credit counseling. We're local, we're accountable, and we can do more. You make the call when the time's right for you.
When it comes to competition, there really is none for Consumer Credit of America.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
Shalom. Welcome back to Understanding the World with Rabbi Kaufman. I was talking about what possibilities there are for a peace process in 2013. And I was noting that certain groups are trying to pressure the United States government to work more actively to restart the peace process or create a new peace process, really what I would say is the case. And most of these groups tend to believe that all violence is bad violence. And the statement by the National Interreligious Leadership Initiative, I think, goes to that. They also tend to believe that the Israelis cause all violence. And they believe this because the Israelis are more powerful. So that rocket fire coming out of Gaza is largely irrelevant. That's poor people just firing rockets here and there. And the Israelis use F-16s. Oh my goodness, the Israelis are the ones who must be causing the violence. So the statement by the National Interreligious Leadership Initiative says, we recently witnessed shadows of dusk. It's clearly a reference to Operation Pillar of Defense. And what they're arguing is that violence is bringing darkness to the peace process, that the sun is going to go down on the peace process. That is what their argument is. Now, what I can tell you is I believe the argument is wholly wrong. That the exact opposite point of view is actually more accurate. But let me explain why. This would seem to be a reference to Pillar of Defense, in which Israel struck Hamas and Islamic Jihad military sites in Gaza, greatly weakening their ability to attack Israel and removing, as a threat to Israel, Iranian long-range missiles that were being housed there, that were designed to ramp up a violent conflict with Israel. When you say we recently witnessed anything, you would assume that you're not talking about a long-sustained amount of activity before that. And that long-sustained amount of activity before that would be rocket fire out of Gaza against Israeli civilians. A ramping up of the weaponry housed in Gaza that could kill even more Israeli civilians at a further distance away from Gaza. Activity that had been going on for years, not recent. So recently witnessed would hardly be appropriate for months and years of activity by Hamas and Islamic Jihad. And this statement then can only be a condemnation of Israel's actions as hastening an end to the process, not the arming of the militants by Iran in Gaza, or the use of those weapons by Hamas and Islamic Jihad against Israeli civilians. No, that's all irrelevant. Israel's retaliation, not even retaliation, Israel's attempts to defend itself by taking out those weapons And reducing the threat against this population is somehow seen as bringing on the darkness. But one could argue that reducing the armed threat against Israeli civilians and weakening Hamas, the major opponent of any peace agreement between the sides, Operation Pillar of Defense allowed light to appear through the clouds. Why didn't they say that? I would say that. Weakening Hamas makes peace more possible, not less possible. The fact that the National Interreligious Leadership Initiative chose the opposite point of view indicates a clear bias and, in my view, a wrong-headed understanding of those events in the current state of affairs. The understanding is developed more fully in this statement that was included in the document. The current dangerous stalemate, including the legacy of past failed peacemaking efforts, undermines our security and that of others, destabilizes the region, fuels terrorism and extremism, allows continuing Israeli settlement expansion, and prolongs Palestinian unity. This statement alone is the reason I wrote a response to this article on weareforisrael.org. I encourage you to go to weareforisrael.org to read it, because in the next couple of minutes here, I'm not really going to have an opportunity to go through in detail all of the things. But in one statement, this group of mainline Christian leaders, Christian leaders and other progressive left religious leaders put on the lap of Israel blame for multiple evils, while assigning no blame at all to the Palestinian side. There's a mention of past failures in the peace process. There's no mention of the fact that while Israel's repeatedly called for negotiations, the Palestinian side refuses to come to the negotiating table and instead has avoided negotiations entirely and gone to the United Nations in violation of past agreements. There's no mention of the fact that in 2000 at Camp David, there was an agreement that the Palestinians refused. There's no mention of the fact that Hamas took over Gaza in 2007. And has weakened the possibility of even of any negotiations happening. But this idea that what is going on in the Middle East, what is bad in the Middle East, and all the bad things the United States is involved in the Middle East, and everything bad happening in the Middle East, is based on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and particularly on Israel, because remember, all the blame is on Israel for it not moving forward, based on Israel's inability to work with the Palestinians to give them concessions that they're willing to accept. That's what it amounts to. Is ridiculous. You're going to tell me the conflicts in Syria, Egypt, Turkey, Sudan, Iraq, Iran, Libya, Tunisia, Afghanistan, and Mali are all about the Palestinian conflict? Of course they're Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Of course they're not. One could make a much stronger argument, in fact, that what destabilizes those places and what destabilizes the entire region, namely religious extremism, along with anti-Western and anti-Jewish views, makes the peace process untenable or at least much more difficult to pull off for anybody who wants to do it, whether the United States wants to do it, the Palestinian Authority wants to do it, or Israel wants to do it. Those views, those anti-Western, anti-Jewish views, and the radicalism that spans the region is the reason that the peace process hasn't worked. So to argue that, and then the other thing, to argue that an absence of a peace process preserves Palestinian disunity is just really crazy. The Palestinians themselves don't agree on what's going on. So the peace process may even be a wedge issue between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, with the Palestinian Authority wanting to pursue a certain kind of peace, Hamas opposing that very kind of peace and potentially not wanting to pursue peace at all. And so pushing this issue not only will find a much weakened Palestinian unity, but potentially also could further weaken relations between Israel and the Palestinians and damage relations between the United States and Israel at a time when the two need to work together to combat the radicalism and the other challenges in the Middle East. We'll talk much more about all of this in future shows. We'll talk about it individually. We'll talk more about Israeli issues, about Israel-Palestinian issues, about Middle East issues. We'll talk about all kinds of issues related to foreign policy around the world, issues related to America, issues related to the Jewish people and the Jewish world, and I hope you will join me again. I will see you next Thursday morning, 8:45 Central Time, right here, one2talk2.com and webcast1live.com. Thank you.